The market square was alive with energy that morning, the kind of day where everything seemed possible. Stalls stretched out in every direction, their colorful awnings fluttering gently in the breeze. The air carried the mingling scents of fresh bread, ripe fruits, and spices that made your mouth water just walking by. It was a place full of life. Children darting between legs, merchants shouting to catch attention, and neighbors exchanging gossip over baskets of goods. I had set up my little stall near the edge of the square, away from the busiest spots, but still visible enough for curious passersby. My herbs were neatly arranged on a wooden table, each bundle tied with care. Lavender, rosemary, mint, thyme, they all sat there like tiny treasures waiting to be discovered. People often came to me for remedies or cooking ingredients, and while I didn't make much, it was enough to keep food on our table and a roof over our heads. But as peaceful as the scene looked, there was always an undercurrent of tension. You could feel it whenever the royal guards appeared. Their polished armor gleamed under the sunlight, making them look almost otherworldly compared to the rest of us. They moved through the crowd like shadows, watching silently, their presence both intimidating and unavoidable. Most people kept their heads down when they passed, pretending not to notice. It wasn't worth drawing their attention unless you absolutely had to. That day, however, something felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, a sense that things weren't quite right. Whispers spread among the vendors about a new tax, a protection fee, they called it. Supposedly, this money would go toward funding the very guards who stood idly by while we worked ourselves to exhaustion. But no one really believed that. Everyone knew where the coins ended up, in the pockets of the king and his loyal followers. When Sir Alden, the captain of the royal guard, stepped into view, my stomach tightened. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his armor clicking softly with each step. His piercing blue eyes scanned the crowd methodically, missing nothing. When he finally stopped in front of my stall, I felt my heart skip a beat. "Good day, citizen," he said, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth. "Have you paid your protection fee?" His question hung in the air like a storm cloud. I wanted to tell him how unfair it was, how we already struggled to survive without giving away more of what little we had. But before I could think better of it, anger bubbled up inside me. All the frustration, all the injustice, it boiled over in an instant. Without thinking, I leaned forward and spat directly into his face. The moment it happened, I froze. So did everyone else around us. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Sir Alden wiped his cheek with the back of his hand. For a second, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then his lips curled into a thin, dangerous smile. "You'll regret this," he said quietly, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. And deep down, I knew he was right. The moment those words left Sir Alden's mouth, a cold shiver ran down my spine. I had acted on impulse, letting my anger take control, but now the reality of what I'd done began to sink in. His icy tone and unblinking stare sent a clear message. There would be consequences, and they wouldn't be pleasant. Before I could say another word, or even apologize, though I wasn't sure I wanted to, 2 guards appeared at his side. They grabbed me roughly by the arms, dragging me away from my stall. My herbs tumbled to the ground, scattering across the cobblestones as if they were nothing more than weeds. The crowd parted silently, their eyes wide with shock or fear. Some looked away, unwilling to meet my gaze, while others whispered behind cupped hands. No one stepped forward to help. "Wait," I shouted, struggling against the iron grip of the guards. "You can't do this. I haven't done anything wrong." But my protests fell on deaf ears. Sir Alden simply turned and walked ahead, his armor clinking with each step, as though dismissing me entirely. They dragged me through the winding streets of the village until we reached the castle gates. Beyond them lay a dimly lit corridor that led to the dungeons, a place I'd only ever heard about in stories meant to scare children into behaving. The air grew colder with every step, damp and heavy, carrying the faint smell of mildew and despair. When they finally shoved me into a tiny cell, the heavy doors slamming shut behind me. I felt like the world had collapsed around me. Time passed slowly in that dark, suffocating space. Minutes stretched into hours, and still, no one came. The silence was broken only by the occasional drip of water somewhere in the distance, and the faint echo of footsteps above. My mind raced with thoughts of what might happen next. Would they throw me out of the village? Fine me until I couldn't pay? Or worse? When the door finally creaked open again, it was Sir Alden who entered, flanked by two other guards. His polished armor gleamed even in the dim light, a stark contrast to the grim surroundings. He stood there for a moment, studying me like a predator sizing up its prey. "You've made a grave mistake," he said, his voice calm but laced with menace. "Public humiliation is not something I tolerate lightly." I clenched my fists, trying to summon some shred of defiance despite the fear clawing at my chest. "Humiliation?" I shot back, my voice trembling but firm. "You call demanding money from people who barely have enough to eat protection. That's the real shame here." For a brief second, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt cross his face, but it vanished almost instantly. Instead, he gestured to the guards, who stepped forward and pulled me to my feet. "You will learn respect," he said coldly, "and you will learn it the hard way." They marched me out of the dungeon and into the heart of the village square, where a wooden post awaited. A small crowd had already gathered, their faces pale and somber. Word traveled fast in our little community, and everyone knew why I was being brought before them. As the guards tied my wrists to the post, I scanned the sea of faces, searching for anyone brave enough to stand with me. But all I saw were downcast eyes and uneasy expressions. Then came the whip. Each crack echoed like thunder, followed by searing pain as the leather bit into my skin. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but I refused to scream. Let them see my suffering. Let them know exactly what kind of rulers they served. By the time it was over, my body felt like it was on fire, and the cobblestones beneath me were slick with blood. As I lay there, broken and humiliated, the crowd dispersed quietly, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The lesson was clear. Defiance came at a cost, and mine had been steep. Yet even in that moment of utter defeat, a tiny spark of rebellion lingered within me. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. The days that followed were a blur of pain and exhaustion. My back burned with every movement, the wounds raw and angry against the rough fabric of my clothes. Even lying down offered no relief. The slightest pressure sent waves of agony coursing through me. I tried to clean the cuts as best I could, using water from the well and strips of cloth torn from an old dress, but without proper care, they soon began to fester. The stench of infection filled the small room where I slept, a constant reminder of what I had endured. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the weight of shame that pressed down on me. Every time I passed by the market square, I could feel the eyes of my neighbors boring into me. Some looked away quickly, pretending not to notice, while others whispered behind their hands. Children who once ran up to greet me now clung to their parents' legs, wide-eyed and wary. It was as if I had become a ghost, present but unseen, alive yet erased from the fabric of the community. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. What did their opinions matter when they refused to stand up for themselves? When they let fear dictate their actions, bowing to the whims of men in shiny armor instead of fighting for what was right? But as the days turned into weeks, the isolation began to wear on me. Loneliness crept in like a thief in the night, stealing away the little joy I had left. One evening, as I sat alone by the fire, tears streaming silently down my face, I heard a soft knock at the door. Startled, I wiped my cheeks and called out, "Who is it?" "It's Ilara," came the reply, hesitant but warm. Ilara. Her name stirred something deep within me, a flicker of hope amidst the darkness. She lived on the outskirts of the village, known for her quiet strength and sharp mind. Unlike many others, she never shied away from speaking her truth, though she did so carefully, always choosing her words with precision. If anyone would understand what I was going through, it was her. I opened the door to find her standing there, a basket of herbs and bandages in hand. Her dark hair was tucked under a scarf, and her kind eyes softened when she saw the state I was in. Without a word, she stepped inside and set the basket down on the table. "You shouldn't have to go through this alone," she said simply, pulling up a chair beside me. For the first time in weeks, I felt a lump rise in my throat, not from sadness, but from gratitude. Ilara didn't lecture me or scold me for my defiance. Instead, she listened as I poured out my heart, sharing everything I'd been too afraid to say aloud. I told her about the anger that had consumed me, the frustration of watching our people suffer under unjust laws, and the crushing loneliness that followed my punishment. When I finished, she nodded thoughtfully. "You were brave to stand up to them," she said. "Braver than most. But bravery alone isn't enough. To truly fight back, we need more than rage. We need unity." Her words struck a chord deep within me. Unity. The idea seemed impossible, given how divided the village had become. Yet, as Ilara explained her vision, a network of like-minded individuals working together to resist the king's oppression, I felt the tiny spark of rebellion inside me grow brighter. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Maybe there were others who shared my anger, my pain, my desire for change. By the time she left that night, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. For the first time since the whipping, I allowed myself to imagine a different future, one where we weren't just surviving, but thriving. One where justice wasn't a distant dream, but a reality we built together. And though the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't done fighting. Not yet. The days that followed my meeting with Ilara marked the beginning of a transformation, not just for me, but for the entire village. She returned often, bringing not only supplies to tend to my wounds, but also ideas and stories that reignited something inside me. Hope. Hope that change was possible, even in a place as oppressive as ours. Hope that we weren't powerless against the king's greed and cruelty. Ilara introduced me to others who felt the same way, people I would never have suspected. There was Thomas, the baker whose shop always smelled of fresh bread, who secretly slipped extra loaves to families struggling to make ends meet. Then there was Leela, a seamstress with nimble fingers and a sharp tongue, who stitched hidden messages into the linings of garments meant for the castle staff. Even old man Grayson, who everyone thought was half-blind and deaf, turned out to be a master at gathering information, his weathered face masking a mind sharper than any sword. Together, we formed what Ilara called the Ember Circle, a name inspired by the idea that even the smallest flame could grow into a roaring fire if nurtured carefully. Our meetings took place in secret, usually late at night when the streets were empty and the guards were distracted by their ale. We gathered in basements, barns, or under the cover of dense woods, speaking in hushed tones about how to resist without drawing too much attention. Ilara became our guide, teaching us patience and strategy. "Anger is a spark," she said one evening, her voice steady but passionate. "But sparks burn out quickly unless they're fed. We need to think before we act, plan before we strike. That's how we'll win." Her lessons stuck with me. I realize now why my defiance had ended so badly. It wasn't because I stood up for myself. It was because I did it alone, without thinking beyond the moment. This time, things would be different. Instead of confronting the guards head-on, we worked behind the scenes, chipping away at the foundation of their power bit by bit. We started small. At first, it was harmless pranks designed to unsettle them. Buckets of water balanced precariously above doors, carts mysteriously rolling downhill during patrols, or false alarms that sent them scrambling to non-existent emergencies. These acts might have seemed trivial, but they served a purpose. They reminded the guards that they weren't untouchable. They planted seeds of doubt in their minds, making them question whether they truly controlled everything. As word of these incidents spread, whispers began to circulate among the villagers. People noticed the cracks forming in the guards' armor, both literal and metaphorical. Some dared to laugh quietly behind closed doors, while others grew bolder, refusing to bow quite so deeply or lowering their voices less when criticizing the king. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere in the village shifted. Fear still lingered, but alongside it came a newfound sense of possibility. Even Sir Alden seemed affected. Though he continued his patrols with the same rigid precision, there was a tension in his movements now, a hesitation in his gaze. He no longer strutted through the market square like a king surveying his kingdom. Instead, he scanned the crowd warily, as though expecting trouble at every turn. It was subtle, but those of us watching closely could see it, the tiniest fracture in his confidence. One night, after a particularly successful act of sabotage, Ilara turned to me with a rare smile. "You see," she said softly, "this is how we fight. Not with brute force, but with cleverness, with unity. And soon, they won't know what hit them." I nodded, feeling the warmth spread through my chest, a mix of pride and determination. The scars on my back still ached, but they no longer weighed me down. They were a reminder of where I'd been, yes, but also of how far I'd come. For the first time in a long time, I believed we could win. As the ember circle grew bolder, so did our actions. What started as small acts of mischief evolved into something far more impactful, organized resistance that struck at the heart of the king's control. We didn't just aim to annoy the guards anymore. We targeted the systems that kept the villagers oppressed. Every plan was carefully crafted, every move calculated to weaken their grip without giving them a clear enemy to retaliate against. One of our most daring operations involved intercepting shipments of grain meant for the castle. The king's men routinely seized food from local farmers, claiming it was tax or tribute, only to hoard it in storage while ordinary people went hungry. Ilara had discovered the location of one such warehouse, a crumbling stone building on the outskirts of the village, guarded by only 2 bored soldiers who spent most of their time gambling. The night we decided to act, my heart raced with a mix of fear and excitement. A group of us crept through the shadows, armed not with weapons, but with sacks and determination. Thomas and Leela distracted the guards by starting a loud argument near the front gate, drawing their attention away from the rear entrance. Meanwhile, Old Man Grayson picked the lock with surprising skill, his gnarled hands moving swiftly despite his age. Once inside, we worked quickly, filling sack after sack with grain and slipping back out before the guards even realized what had happened. By dawn, the stolen grain had been distributed among the neediest families in the village. For the first time in months, children ate until they were full, and mothers didn't have to ration every bite. Word spread fast, and though no one admitted to knowing where the food came from, there was an unspoken understanding. Someone was looking out for them. That knowledge lit a fire in the hearts of many. It gave them courage, made them believe that maybe, just maybe, things could change. But not all our victories were material. Some of our greatest triumphs came in the form of information. Ilara taught us how to listen, to eavesdrop on conversations between guards, to read between the lines of official decrees, and to piece together patterns that revealed cracks in the system. One day, she brought news that sent shockwaves through the group. Sir Alden himself was beginning to question the morality of his orders. Apparently, he'd confided in a trusted subordinate about feeling uneasy with the way taxes were enforced and how brutally punishments were carried out. Whether this unease stemmed from guilt over incidents like mine or a growing awareness of the villagers' suffering, we couldn't be sure, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that doubt had taken root in the mind of the man who once seemed untouchable. We capitalized on this weakness. Using anonymous notes left in strategic places, we fed Sir Alden snippets of information designed to make him question his loyalty to the king. "Is this truly justice?" one note read. "Or are you simply a tool for tyranny?" Another asked, "How long will you stand by while innocent people starve?" It was risky, of course. If he ever traced the messages back to us, the consequences would be severe. But Ilara insisted it was worth the gamble. Even the strongest walls crumble when doubt seeps into their foundation. she said, and slowly we began to see signs that she was right. Sir Alden became less aggressive during patrols, hesitating before enforcing harsh penalties. His once stoic demeanor faltered, replaced by a quiet tension that betrayed his inner conflict. Still, I couldn't let myself forget the scars on my back, the price I'd paid for standing up to him. As much as I wanted to believe he might change, part of me remained wary. Could someone like him really turn against the very system he'd sworn to uphold? Or was this just another trick, a way to lull us into complacency? Despite my doubts, one thing was certain. The balance of power was shifting. The king's iron grip on the village was loosening, bit by bit, thanks to the collective efforts of ordinary people refusing to stay silent any longer. And though the road ahead was still fraught with danger, I felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything I'd ever known. For the first time, I understood what Ilara meant when she said unity was our greatest weapon. Together, we weren't just surviving. We were fighting back, and nothing could stop us now. The momentum of our resistance grew stronger with each passing week. The Ember Circle wasn't just a group of individuals anymore. We had become a force, a quiet storm brewing beneath the surface of the village. Our actions, though subtle, were beginning to ripple outward, shaking the foundations of the king's rule. People who once feared speaking out began to find their voices, emboldened by the knowledge that they weren't alone. One evening, as we gathered in the old barn on the edge of the woods, Ilara stood before us, her expression serious but hopeful. "We've done well so far," she began, pacing slowly as her eyes scanned the room. "But it's time to take things further. We can't keep chipping away at the edges forever. If we want real change, we need to strike at the heart." Her words sent a shiver through me. Striking at the heart meant confronting the king directly, or at least exposing his corruption in a way that couldn't be ignored. It was risky, far more dangerous than anything we'd attempted before. But deep down, I knew she was right. Small victories wouldn't be enough to topple a system built on greed and fear. Our plan was simple yet audacious. Organize a public protest in the market square, the very place where I had once faced Sir Alden's wrath. The idea terrified me. Standing there again, surrounded by villagers and guards alike, felt like stepping back into a nightmare. But this time, I wouldn't be alone. This time, we would stand together. To prepare, we spread the word carefully, using coded messages hidden in songs sung by traveling minstrels or tucked into baskets of goods sold at the market. We encouraged people not to shout or fight, but to gather peacefully, holding banners and signs that read things like "Fairness, not fear," and "Enough is enough." Our goal wasn't violence, it was visibility. We wanted the king to see the faces of those he oppressed, to hear their voices united in defiance. On the day of the protest, my nerves were stretched taut like bowstrings. As dawn broke, I joined the others in the square, clutching a banner made from scraps of fabric stitched together by Layla's skilled hands. Slowly, the space filled with villagers, young and old, rich and poor, all drawn by the promise of solidarity. For the first time in years, the market square buzzed with energy that wasn't born of fear, but of hope. When the royal guards arrived, their armor glinting menacingly in the sunlight, tension crackled in the air. Sir Alden himself led the charge, his face unreadable as he surveyed the crowd. He raised a hand, signaling for silence, and stepped forward. "This gathering is unlawful," he declared, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "Disperse now, or face punishment." For a moment, no one moved. Then, from somewhere in the throng, a voice rang out, clear and steady. "Why should we? What law are we breaking by asking for fairness?" It was Thomas, standing tall despite the danger. His words sparked a chorus of agreement, voices rising like waves crashing against the shore. Sir Alden hesitated, clearly unprepared for such unity. He glanced at his men, then back at the crowd, uncertainty flickering across his face. Ilara seized the moment. Stepping forward, she addressed him directly. "Sir Alden," she said, her tone calm but firm, "look around you. These are your people, The ones you swore to protect. Are you truly willing to punish them for demanding justice? The silence that followed was deafening. Sir Alden's jaw tightened, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. But instead of ordering an attack, he lowered his gaze and took a step back. "Return to your homes," he said finally, his voice quieter now. "This matter will be reviewed." It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense, but it was something far greater, a crack in the wall of oppression. The guards retreated, leaving the square eerily quiet. As the crowd dispersed, a newfound sense of empowerment lingered in the air. We had stood up, and they had faltered. That night, as I sat by the fire with Ilara and the others, I allowed myself a rare moment of pride. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. We had proven that even the smallest flames could grow into a blaze bright enough to light the way forward. The protest in the market square marked a turning point, not just for our village, but for the entire kingdom. Word of what had happened spread quickly, carried by travelers and merchants who passed through our humble streets. Stories of ordinary people standing up to tyranny ignited something in neighboring towns and villages. What began as a single act of defiance in our small corner of the world grew into a movement that stretched far beyond anything we could have imagined. In the weeks that followed, more protests erupted across the land. Farmers refused to hand over their crops without fair payment. Merchants closed their stalls in solidarity. Even some members of the royal guard, men who had once enforced the king's cruel laws, began questioning their role. Sir Alden disappeared shortly after the protest, his absence sparking rumors that he had either fled or secretly joined the resistance. Whatever the truth, his departure left a void in the ranks, one that weakened the king's control even further. The tipping point came when a group of nobles within the castle itself turned against the king. These were men and women who had long benefited from his rule, but had grown disillusioned by his greed and cruelty. They presented evidence of corruption. Documents detailing stolen taxes, illegal land seizures, and countless injustices inflicted upon the people. The council convened an emergency hearing, and for the first time in decades, the king was forced to answer for his actions. When the decision was announced, a unanimous vote to remove him from power, the entire village erupted in celebration. It wasn't just joy, it was relief, vindication, and triumph all rolled into one. The Ember Circle gathered in the square, laughing and crying as fireworks lit up the night sky. Ilara stood beside me, her eyes shining with pride. "We did it," she said softly. "Together." But as much as I wanted to revel in the victory, part of me couldn't forget the cost. The scars on my back still ached on cold nights, a reminder of the price I'd paid for speaking out. Others bore their own wounds, physical, emotional, or both. Yet those scars also told a story, one of resilience, courage, and unity. They reminded us that change doesn't come easily, but it is always worth fighting for. Years later, life in the village transformed in ways I never thought possible. A council of elected representatives replaced the king, promising transparency and fairness. Taxes were used to build schools, improve roads, and support struggling families. The market square, once a place of fear, became a symbol of hope and community. Now, as I sit surrounded by grandchildren eager to hear tales of the past, I tell them about the woman who spat in the face of a royal guard. I describe the pain, the loneliness, and the fear, but also the strength she found when others stood beside her. My story ends not with anger or bitterness, but with a lesson I've carried my entire life. Courage isn't the absence of fear. I tell them, my voice steady with age and wisdom. It's the choice to act despite it. Stand firm in your beliefs, but remember that no battle is won alone. Together, we are stronger than any tyrant, richer than any king, and braver than anyone who tries to silence us. And as they listen, wide-eyed and inspired, I know the flame of rebellion will burn brightly in their hearts too, for generations to come.